Welcome to today's Learn at Lunchtime program from the State Museum of Pennsylvania. I am Beth Erickson. The topic today is Pennsylvania beaches, past and present, and with us is Hailey Filippelli, Senior Geoscientist with the Pennsylvania Department of Conservation and Natural Resources Bureau of Geological Survey. Hailey holds both a bachelor's and a master's degree in Earth and Space Science from Westchester University. Her graduate research focused on applying remote sensing techniques to identify and analyze coastal erosion, which sparked a strong interest in spatial analysis and environmental change. In 2022, she joined the Pennsylvania Geological Survey as a field mapper and has since transitioned into her current role as a Geographic Information Systems Specialist. Hello, Hailey, and thank you for presenting today.
Hi, thank you for having me.
So tell us a little bit about yourself and what a geoscientist does.
Sure. So, in the broadest sense, a geoscientist studies the Earth, how it works, how it's changed over time, how we can use resources responsibly. And that could mean anything from analyzing rocks and minerals to studying natural hazards like earthquakes and sinkholes. And what I do as a geoscientist is I support our Bureau's geologic mapping endeavors and data analysis, and I help to create visuals for the public and for other professionals, usually through the creation of maps. And what I love about this is that it's super hands-on. I'm able to use my own creativity to figure out how to best showcase this stuff. Outside of work, I love to go hiking, I love to travel, and of course, I love going to the beach.
Well, today's topic is Pennsylvania beaches, and given that it's summer, many people are vacationing at locations with beaches. Maybe you have as well, or maybe you're planning to. So, why do you think people are drawn to beaches? What do you think is the attraction?
I think that people love the beach for a bunch of reasons, but primarily I think that beaches trigger like a sense of relaxation for a lot of us. They're a bit of a break from everyday life, and I think a lot of people associate the beach with really good memories.
Well, I, for one, am excited about this topic. So let's get to your presentation to learn more. So while Haley sets up the presentation, let me remind the audience that this webinar is being recorded. By participating in this webinar, you are consenting to the recording, retention, and use of any statements recorded as part of this webinar. Included in today's webinar is the opportunity to ask questions. Please submit those questions about today's topic in the Q&A feature, and Haley will answer them after the presentation is complete. So Haley, when you are ready, please
Sure.
begin.
All right. Hello, everyone. I figured the best way to start off a presentation about beaches is probably to define what a beach is. So, a beach is a strip of land that lies along the edge of a body of water, typically an ocean or a lake. And a lot of times, or it seems to be highly debated in the scientific community as to whether or not rivers are part of this definition of a body of water. For our sake today, for this presentation, I will be including some examples of Pennsylvania river beaches, as well as explaining how they form. Uh, Materials that cover beaches include things such as sand, pebbles, rocks, and seashell fragments. And a beach is just one type of coastal feature, others including marshes, dunes, reefs, swamps, and cliffs. So there are different varieties of beaches, and beaches are typically comprised of the local dominant sediment type. So here is an example of where that really shines through. This is a photo from March of this year of one of the beaches in Hawaii. And as you can see, there's a lot of black sand on this beach. These beaches are a direct result of the island's volcanic origins. Black sand beaches in Hawaii are formed by the erosion of volcanic rock, specifically basalt, into smaller particles. And when lava flows into the ocean, it cools very rapidly and therefore shatters into different fragments, which are then eventually ground down by wave action. And so I kind of already spoiled the beginning of this, but the next big topic to discuss is how do beaches form? So, just to simplify it a bit, let's say that we have a rock, and this rock is outside in nature. It's experiencing all types of things that nature provides, including rain, including wind, sometimes ice. And eventually, over time, this rock starts to break down and break down into smaller pieces. This process here is called weathering. And eventually, these smaller pieces get transported. The process of moving weathered material from one location to another is called erosion. And there are a few ways sediments can be transported: streams, rivers, ice glaciers, landslides, gravity, and wind are all included. Different rock sizes are associated with different transport methods. For example, wind can only carry the lightest particles, whereas ice can transport larger rocks. The final stage of this process is deposition. For our sake, for this example today, the body of water that I will be showing is the ocean, but this also includes lakes and highly debated rivers as well. So now we have all of the sediment suspended in our body of water, in this case, the ocean, which is up against the coastline. And the sand or other particles that make up the beach are then distributed by wave action. As waves crash into the beach, they carry sediment, in our case sand, with them. So here we have our waves crashing into the beach. Some of the water here gets absorbed by the sand, and sand therefore gets deposited during this step. The rest of the water washes back out as the wave recedes, and this is called backwash. Backwash removes sand from the beach and returns it to the ocean. Sand will therefore be deposited or eroded depending on which process is dominant. So to summarize, gentler waves mean more water gets absorbed by the coastline and more sand is deposited. Harsher waves mean the beach gets inundated or it has too much water, and less sand will therefore be deposited. So now that we know what beaches are and how they form, we can start to talk about some modern Pennsylvania beaches. And I don't know about you guys, but the first Pennsylvania beach I think of is in Erie, Pennsylvania, on the shores of Lake Erie. Lake Erie also borders the Canadian province of Ontario and parts of Michigan, Ohio, and New York, but we're going to be talking about in Erie specifically. Lake Erie has both pebbly and sandy beaches, both of which are pictured here on the screen. One of Lake Erie's sandy beaches is Presque Isle, pictured in the right-hand images. Presque Isle is a great example of a beach that undergoes natural processes and as a result requires man-made assistance, which is super important to the concept of beaches everywhere in the world. So I'd like to dive into this example a little bit more to explain kind of how the two interact together. To begin, I'd like to explain how Presque Isle formed. The area has formed through a combination of glacial retreat and ongoing longshore drift. I will explain both of these processes in further detail here. Between 13,000 and 14,000 years ago, there was a glacier that led to the formation of a moraine. A moraine is essentially just a ridge of glacial debris, and this moraine formed across Lake Erie. This moraine in particular was left behind as the ice from the glacier melted away. When the ice melted away from the Lake Erie area, the lake was much lower than present day, and the moraine formed a ridge of dry land. This moraine provided the initial foundation for what is now Presque Isle. Waves and currents began to deposit sand and sediment onto the moraine, gradually building up and extending this landform. Historic maps show us that Presque Isle has changed over the last 200 years. Different data allow us to reconstruct the history of its shape. Presque Isle is a spit or a landform that is made up of a narrow strip of land, typically made out of sand, that extends into a body of water. Throughout recent history, the spit has migrated, caused by erosion along the west side and growth to the north and east. In addition, there have been several times where the spit has become an island. Storm waves have broken the neck or the thinnest part of Presque Isle towards the bottom, and it has isolated the main section of the spit at least 4 times since 1819. One of the gaps even actually remained open for 32 years before eventually being closed. Now to the present day, I'd like to talk about what currently shapes Presque Isle. On the top left side of the screen is a model of the different areas of the Presque Isle Spit. Wind, waves, and currents are the primary factors that influence the shape of the spit. Wind carries sand along the beaches and from the beaches to the back shore and dunes. And after this, plants tend to trap and hold the sand, which builds new dunes. Waves move up the beach face at an angle. Sand grains moving with the water travel along the shore in a zigzag pattern, which you can see in the top right image. In addition, complex interactions of waves set up currents in the nearshore zone. Wave turbulence picks up sand grains, which can be moved offshore or along the shore by currents. This is known as longshore current, and it is shown in the bottom image on the screen. We now know that the sand along Presque Isle is always moving. Presque Isle is a huge natural attraction. Roads, parking lots, and buildings have all been constructed on Presque Isle. Therefore, many would like to see the area intact. Natural processes all but ensure that the spit is always moving and changing, controlled by the relative intensity of erosion, transport, and deposition of sand in different areas. So how do we mitigate this? For at least 170 years, people have tried many, many ways to control erosion and stabilize the beach here. I'd like to quickly review some of the methods used to mitigate erosion, as these methods are not just local to Presque Isle, they are used everywhere around the world. The first are groins, which are long, narrow structures that project from the beach into the lake and therefore interrupt the long shore transport of sand. The common accumulation of sand on the updrift side, which is at Presque Isle, it's usually the southwest side, shows that they generally work. However, you will equally find that erosion occurs on the downdrift side. Seawalls are the next type of structure used at Presque Isle to mitigate erosion. They are a common way to protect critical areas from storm waves, and smaller seawalls shield much of the bay shore from erosion around Erie. Beach nourishment is also used at Presque Isle and has been since the 50s. This method of shore protection combats erosion by replacing the eroded material and supplying new sand to the longshore transport system. This must be repeated regularly and is quite expensive. Finally, detached breakwaters are used and are designed to work by sheltering the shore from the full energy of the waves and allowing sand to accumulate behind them. All of these mitigation methods have helped to keep Presque Isle relatively in place, but they all have their costs, their pros and their cons. Many of these methods are used worldwide in an effort to stop the erosion of coastal towns and coastal areas. And now that we've reviewed all of these natural processes and the human intervention of not only Pennsylvania beaches, but beaches everywhere, I'd like to review the remaining types of beaches that you can find here in Pennsylvania. River beaches are also called point bars, and these occur where deposition happens on the inside of meanders. Meanders are just bends or curves in a river. Water flows faster on the outside of a river meander due to increased distance, less friction, and forces pushing it outward. The water on the outside of the bend has to travel a greater distance compared to the water on the inside, leading to a faster flow. Because of this, you get sediments that accumulate on the inside of these meanders, where the flow is slower and the sediment has a chance to actually settle. And an example of a river in Pennsylvania that has quite a few beaches along it is the Susquehanna. This river runs north to south through the state. And a specific example of a river beach along the Susquehanna is Riverfront Park in Marietta. As you can see on the right-hand image, there's like a red pinpoint that locates where this Riverfront Park is. And I don't know if you guys noticed it yet, but that is on the inside of a meander. So you can see in the left-hand image all of that sand, maybe some kind of mud there too. That was able to settle because it is on the inside of that meander and the water moves slower in there. Now, I could probably bring up thousands more examples of different beaches in Pennsylvania. They're mostly surrounding natural lakes and rivers, but we do also have man-made beaches in the state. And I don't know if any of you are familiar, but Raystown Lake is a man-made beach. Sand was actually brought into the area, and particularly for the construction of recreational areas designed to basically emulate beaches. So what can these modern beaches tell us about the past? Well, in order to understand that, we have to understand the law of uniformitarianism. This law states that natural processes that operate today must be the same everywhere else and in the past. So essentially just the present is key to the past. Now let's look at some examples of this in action. On the left-hand side here, we have an image of a standard present-day sandy beach. And on the right-hand side, we have a picture of a sandstone rock. This rock is primarily composed of sand grains, sometimes varying in size. And using the law of uniformitarianism, we can assume that, okay, this is a primarily sand-composed rock. This could have been at one point a sandy beach in the past. Another example of this is conglomerate. Conglomerate is a rock type that contains big pebbles usually, and sometimes mixed in there are some smaller sediments. And this kind of reminds us of maybe the pebbly beach at Lake Erie. So once again, using that law of uniformitarianism, we can say, okay, maybe at one point in time, this was also a pebbly beach. Our last example is coconite. Coconite is a rock type that has a lot of like shelly fragments in it, and it kind of resembles what you might see on a very shelly beach. Once again, this could have at one point in time also been a shelly beach. So not only does rock type tell us something about maybe the past depositional environment, but sedimentary structures also do that as well. Sedimentary structures are features found in sedimentary rocks that help us understand how and where the rocks were formed. I don't know if you guys have noticed it yet, but on the right-hand side on that picture, there are some ripple marks. So this tells us that at one point in time, this rock was likely in an environment just like the picture on the left. So let's review some ancient Pennsylvania beaches, and we'll start with the oldest example, which is the Chickies Formation. This formation was deposited approximately between 513 to 541 million years ago. You can find this rock in southeast and south central Pennsylvania, and it is composed primarily of sandstone, or quartzite, sorry, which is basically sandstone that underwent burial, heat, and pressure. And the image on the left here shows where Pennsylvania probably would have been located 500 million years ago. As you can see, half of the state is essentially covered by a coastline, which supports that the Chickies was at one point an ancient beach. In addition, on the far right picture, it's kind of hard to see, so I'll zoom in here. You can see these lines, and these lines are actually something called scolithos tubes or scolithos burrows. And scolithos was basically just an ancient marine worm. This is once again a type of sedimentary structure that indicates that this was at one point a marine environment. A modern day equivalent of the Chickies Formation would probably be something like California or parts of Southeast Asia. These are just sandy coastlines in tectonically active areas. Another fun fact is the rock on the right-hand side in the ripple mark slide is actually also the Chickies Formation. And you might be wondering, why is this rock vertical whenever, it's deposited horizontally as you see on the left? This is because it underwent burial, heat, and pressure, and 2 stages of folding due to land pushing up against land. Therefore, it's no longer horizontal. Our next example of an ancient beach is the Fornobs Formation, which is about 358 to 383 million years old. In the image on the left, once again, you can see this is where Pennsylvania might have been located at this time, and it is once again, it has a coastline running straight through it. Where is this rock found? You can find it in central Pennsylvania, and it is primarily composed of sandstone. And you might have noticed this again already, but it also has ripple marks. So this is once again supporting the theory that this was a beach at one point in time. The Fornobs Formation is also a modern day equivalent of it would also probably be a sandy coastline in a tectonically active region. Once again, California and parts of Southeast Asia are good representations of that. Our last example is the Lock Haven Formation. This was formed around the same time as the Four Knobs, therefore have the same image there on the left, coastline running through the center of the state. This formation is found in central and northern Pennsylvania, and it is partly sandstone, and it also contains coconite, which is that rock that I showed you earlier that is made up of like fossil or shell fragments. This once again points to it being at one point a beach of some sort. The Lock Haven also displays crossbedding, which is another type of sedimentary structure. Crossbedding happens when layers of sediment are deposited at an angle instead of flat. This usually forms as wind or water moves sand in ripples or dunes. Sediment builds up on the gentle side of the ripple, then slides down the steeper side, creating slanted layers. And in this image here, you can see this is the Lock Haven Formation. It is kind of hard to visualize because the beds are no longer lying flat. They were deformed during tectonic activity. But we did draw in some lines here that you can kind of helps you to see the crossbedding a little bit better. So if you guys are interested in seeing some of these ancient beaches or even some present day ones, we have a great series, the Trail of Geology series. Has about 125 different guides, has a bunch of information about all different types of geologic wonders in Pennsylvania, including Presque Isle, including the Lock Haven and the Chickies Rock formations. So this is a really great resource if you guys are interested. Additionally, another great place to access our publications and all sorts of geologic information about Pennsylvania is PA Geode, which I've included both a link and a QR code here for. And you can also access the Trail of Geology publications here, as you can see on the left-hand side. And that is all I've got for you guys today. Thank you so much for listening.
Hailey, thank you so much for that presentation. Go ahead and turn your camera on and we'll get to some questions. Let's see, the first one we have, you mentioned that Lake Erie has two types of beaches, pebbly and sandy. Why is that?
That's a great question. So both geological and hydrodynamic factors play a role in this variation. The Lake Erie Basin was carved by glaciers, which deposited a variety of sediment sizes. Some of the areas of the shoreline are backed by easily eroded bluffs, and these are composed of different size sediments. One example is the bluffs west of Long Point, Canada, which have a high sand content, and therefore they erode down into a sandier beach. On the other hand, the area east of Cleveland, Ohio, is dominated by bluffs with a smaller percentage of sand, and that therefore results in beaches with a higher pebble content. And in addition, an area like Presque Isle, which I obviously talked about in depth in this presentation, is a unique formation along Lake Erie. It's a sand spit, and it was formed through some different processes, including longshore drift.
So when you were talking about the ancient beach rock formations, what fossils can you find in those?
These formations can yield a wide variety of fossils. In Pennsylvania, in particular, you can commonly find marine invertebrates, such as brachiopods and crinoids, as well as things like fish scales and other types of shells.
So a question about, this is a long one. What are your thoughts on a recent GSA-NE section publication with a USGS geologist describing the Chickies ripple marks as cleavage intersections, not ripples? That was very specific.
No, that's a great question. I did not see that. That is an interesting point of view. I would have to get together with some of my fellow colleagues here to read that over. And I mean, that's great if that's true. I have no idea though.
Okay, so here's what we'll suggest to the person who has the question, just send an email. We'll send Hailey's information out, get in touch, and you can follow up on that. So
Yeah, definitely.
let's get to some more questions. So why are the beaches along rivers not always included in a beach definition?
I honestly have searched long and hard for that. I don't know. I don't know. Like some definitions include rivers specifically as part of like this beach definition, and others specifically state that a river is not included. I don't know exactly why it is such a big point of contention, it feels like. But I can also, if we're interested more in that answer, I can get with some of my colleagues or do a little bit more research on why exactly that might be a thing.
So, talking about beaches, what conditions would prompt the need for human interaction with a beach area? So, for example, does bacteria affect the beach? I guess that would be with the water. Someone commented that Presque Isle was recently closed due to bacteria. What happens at a beach that humans would have to get involved with?
So a lot of human intervention involves erosion. So like storms coming through or just like stronger waves in general coming through and eroding the beach either in like a mass event or slowly over a couple of years. In my with my master's thesis, I was looking into an area in Delaware where a hurricane ripped through back in the late 2000s and completely just wiped out so much of the sand in the area, kind of destroyed the natural area there. And humans then had to come in, replenish, and rebuild the area. So erosion is a huge thing. Bacteria, that is definitely something I'm not super familiar with how they handle that. But that's a good example of where when humans need to intervene along a beach. Usually I just see it's just like the signs that are out that tell you not to go in. I don't know if they like treat it or something in the meantime, but that is a great question.
So you would say erosion's the biggest challenge to maintaining beaches, such as those at Lake Erie.
Yeah, and it can be quite expensive. Like I was talking about with beach nourishment, bringing in sand that fits like the area, like you need it to be the sand that matches that area in particular, and it can be quite expensive to outsource that.
Where do you get sand from?
It's a great question. I'm not sure.
Okay. I'm thinking, we can just start our own beaches somewhere. So, okay, that leads to a question then. So you can own a beach, I suppose, if you have private property and you have your own land and water. Um, and then who's responsible for taking care of that? Is that something that's private? If there's problems, do they report it to the state? Um, if they find something there that they think, do they have to report it? Are there rules about beaches?
I'm sure that there are like regulations when your property is up against like a beach. I know that some states don't allow you to own like a private beach at all, but in the states where that is allowed, I'm sure that there are some type of regulations that keep you from destroying, that area. Now, as far as like if there was like a massive storm to roll in, I just thinking about recent news articles and things that I've seen, I would imagine that a it's probably on like if your house falls into the water, that is, I would assume your problem, unfortunately. But I do know that there are like beach nourishment efforts that would not like stop. I would assume just because there's private property lines, like they would replenish the entire stretch of beach.
So how does the human problem factor into this? So for example, plastics and other litter that ends up on beaches. Um, does that just get buried eventually? That what's not cleaned up? And then how do you think in the future that would be incorporated into the beaches?
Um, so I know that there are areas where because of the way that the currents work in the ocean, there are like massive pileups essentially in some parts of the ocean where all of this plastic and litter accumulates. Obviously, it also ends up on animals, in animals, unfortunately. And as far as how that would factor in to beaches in the future, I have already seen or heard of places where they don't allow like plastic containers, but that doesn't necessarily stop litter from upstream eventually making its way into the ocean. Like as I talked about with sediment transport, the same can happen with litter. Eventually it does make its way into the ocean.
So are Pennsylvania beaches affected by any invasive plant or animal species?
I am sh I'm sure that they are. I don't know any in particular off the top of my head. But that tends I feel like that is a problem mostly everywhere are invasive species.
That would be true. All right. So question about a personal question for you. What is your favorite Pennsylvania beach, Pennsylvania or not, that you have visited?
So my favorite Pennsylvania beach or my favorite beach?
Both. How about we do both?
Okay, so I love the pebble beaches along Lake Erie. That picture was actually one that I took whenever we went up there for a field conference a couple years back. It's such a beautiful beach. The pebbles are awesome. They're so pretty. So that is probably one of my favorite Pennsylvania beaches, which is a very basic answer, I know. My favorite beach in general, like that I've been to is either between La Jolla, which is in around San Diego in California, or the Outer Banks, which I visit every year.
There you go. Really great choices, all three. So I want to thank everyone for your questions. Haley, what would you like the audience to remember from today's presentation?
I would say probably that you don't have to leave the state to find a good beach.
There you go. And you've given us several suggestions. If you have any questions, you can follow up with Haley. Otherwise, we want to thank you for being with us today.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Fantastic. So you can join us for more Learn at Lunchtime programs by visiting the State Museum of Pennsylvania's website at statemuseumpa.org for program information and to sign up.